All right.
And there you go.
Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is Brother Bobby here with Brother Doug and Sister Shoshana and my wife and Sister Chris and Sister Sally's on the phone also. And Brother Dennis is back there also. How you doing, Brother Dennis? So today we're going to go on to a touchy Christian subject. It's a touchy subject for the Christians, but I'm going to start with Acts 15 from 1, and I'm going to read through 10. So Acts 15:1, and certain men came down from Yehuda and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved. So when Shaul, Paul, and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they arranged for Shaul and Barnabas and certain others of them to go up to Jerusalem to the emissaries and ask this question. So being sent on their way by the assembly, they passed through Phoenicia and Shamaron, relating the conversion of the nations, and they were causing great joy to all the brothers. And having arrived in Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the emissaries and the elders, and they reported all that Elohim had done with them. And some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up, saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. And the emissaries and elders came together to look into this matter. And when there had been much dispute, Kepha rose up and said to them, men, brothers, you know that a good while ago Elohim chose among us that by my mouth the nation should hear the word of the good news and believe. And Elohim, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the set-apart spirit as also to us, and made no distinguish between us and them, cleansing their hearts by belief. Now then, what do you Elohim by putting yoke on the neck of the taught ones, neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? So obviously, they're talking against circumcision over here. This is a lot what people use in Christianity to say you don't have to be circumcised in the faith. Okay, Paul, what do you have to say in the very next chapter? Acts 16:1. And he came to Derbe and Lystra, and see, a certain taught one was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Yehudi woman who believed, but his father was Greek, who was well spoken of by the brothers who are at Lystra and Iconium. Shaul wished to have this one go with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Yahudim who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was Greek. Wait a minute, Paul. You just explained to us in the last chapter that circumcision means nothing. Why did you go circumcise this man Timothy? Are you schizophrenic? I don't know. This is what Christians seem to use. Doug, let's ask Peter what he has to think about this. I'll let you take it.
All right, so whoever's new to this topic right now, they might be a little confused right now. They might be scratching their heads like, what's going on here? Okay, what we first got to realize is in 2 Peter chapter 3, 16 to 17, Peter warns us that if we are not taught in the scriptures, and notice back then, historically, the New Testament wasn't written yet. So he says, as also in his writings, 2 Peter 3, 16 to 17, as also in all his letters or epistles, writings, speaking in them of these things in which are some things hard to be understood. Oh, so Paul is hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned, meaning they don't know the Tanakh, they don't know the Old Testament, they don't know the Torah and the prophets, and unstable twist or pervert as they do also the other scriptures. So not just the Tanakh, they twist any other scriptures that they are not learned in unto their own destruction. You therefore, beloved, seeing you know these things before, beware lest you also, being led away with the error of the wicked, fall from your own steadfastness and if I go to the ISR 1998, it will actually say the error of lawlessness. Okay, so again, if we misunderstand Paul's words, Peter warns us that we will fall in the error of lawlessness. So we must keep that in mind as we read Paul's letters. Now, all right, so now we're going to transition, and actually, I would really like to go to Philippians chapter 3, because this actually goes more in depth with the whole circumcision concept and why we got to understand, does Paul contradict himself? Does Paul say one thing and then he goes back on it? So we're going to go to Philippians chapter 3, and we're going to go starting at verse 3. It says, "For we are the circumcision which worship Yahuwah in the Spirit, and rejoice in the Messiah Yahushua, and have no confidence in the flesh. Though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinks that he has whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised the 8th day." So right here we got to understand, Paul is clearly not saying circumcision is bad or not needed, because he is claiming that he is foremost of the circumcision, that he is circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Yashrael, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as of, let me change my translation. It shouldn't say touching the law. That doesn't make sense. And let's see, Hebrew of Hebrews, according to Torah, a Pharisee. Now, another thing we have to be very conscious of is that he was not still a Pharisee when he's writing his letters. Because if you go to Galatians chapter 1, verse 3, it actually says, "I who used to be a Pharisee," the key word is used to be. Let me see if I can actually find that real quick. Galatians chapter 1, verse 3 says, Galatians chapter 1, verse 13, sorry about that. "For you have heard of my former way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the assembly of Yahuwah and ravaged it." So we have to keep that in mind, that Paul does not still consider himself a Pharisee. It's past tense in Philippians 3 when he says a Pharisee. So that's something we got to keep in mind. Concerning zeal, persecuting the assembly in Philippians 3, verse 6, touching the righteousness in which is in the law, blameless. But what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for the Messiah. So basically what he's saying is whatever he gained in Judaism, being a Pharisee, he lost. He counts it all for a loss, having found Yahushua. "Yea, doubtless I count all these things but loss for excellency of the knowledge of the Messiah, Yahushua, my Master, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win the Messiah, and be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the belief of the Messiah, the righteousness which is of Yahuwah by belief, that I may know him in the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death, if by any means I may attain unto the resurrection of the dead." So basically, Paul is saying here in Philippians 3, I count it all for nothing being in Judaism. I count it all for nothing comparing it to what I have found in Messiah, that I would be resurrected at the end, and that I have the righteousness of Yahuwah is now dwelling in me because of my belief, my trust in the Messiah. And he's basically saying he has no righteousness of himself. So, and that's basically the reason I wanted to show Philippians 3, though, is that he is claiming that he's circumcised, and he's boasting that he's circumcised. So we got to understand that Paul's not contradicting himself. So he's obviously in the chapters Bobby quoted from. You got to understand there was a doctrine among the circumcision party in Acts 15 and 16 that you had to be physically circumcised to be saved. And they believed that so strongly that they started putting that above Yahushua's sacrifice. They actually believed that even though you believed in Messiah, if you weren't physically circumcised, you could not be saved. And so that's the point we're trying to bring out, is the context of Acts 15 and Acts 16. So, all right, so now we're going to continue.
So then, Doug, let me jump in there real quick. So why would he circumcise Timothy? The only thing that you could believe that he circumcised him for was, it's the same as immersion. You can't get immersed in water, a physical immersion, unless you believe with all your heart that Yahushua is Messiah. So what do you do to show love for the Father? You obey his commands. So once you believe with all your heart and you are ready to give yourself over to the Father, you would do stuff like get circumcised, all these outwardly things that have to do with the Torah. That's the reasoning behind the circumcision of Timothy, because right after that, he was preaching on the Sabbaths in all the temples. And as you read in 16, he went on to have a whole assembly on his own, because Paul wrote a letter to him, 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. Those are 2 letters to him. So obviously he got circumcised as an outward showing of his love for the Father and for the Son. So I just want to throw that in there, Doug.
Yeah, that was a great point to make. That obviously it's about obedience. It's about loving Yahushua. Yahushua says himself, John, I think it's John 14:15. If you love me, keep my commandments. So, that's not just obviously Paul. If he believes in Yahushua, he's going to be preaching the same thing Yahushua preached. So, and he even says, follow me, mimic me, for I mimic Messiah. I'm just paraphrasing, but that's one of Paul's own quotes, that he mimics Messiah, so we should mimic him. So also in this next part, we will be calling, did Paul say that believers don't have to keep the law? So is Paul contradicting himself? Is he saying the law is bad and then he's saying the law is good? So that's the next part we're going to go into. Did Paul ever claim that we can't keep the commandments, that we don't have to keep the commandments anymore now that we accepted Yahushua? So that's going to be the next part. And we're going to go to Romans chapter 3, verse 31, because this is a key doctrinal verse here. And right here he says, do we then void the law through belief? By no means. Yea, we establish the law. So any Christians listening in, you might want to think about that verse that I just quoted. This is Paul himself saying that. And then if you go to Romans chapter 8, verse 7, it says, and this actually is, no, we're going to go to that in a little bit. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. That's actually touching on our next topic of the walking in the flesh versus walking in the spirit, but we're not there yet. So I just want to see if there's any more that Paul is literally talking about keeping the law opposed to not keeping the law. So right here, now this is another one. It says, Romans 7:14 says, for we know that the law is spiritual, I am carnal, sold under sin. So that's going to be a transition point to our next part, but I have a couple down here from the book of Hebrews I want to read before we get into the walking in the flesh versus walking in the spirit, and what's the difference. I have Hebrews chapter 5 verse 9, and this is just another instance where Paul is telling us that it is required to obey the commandments. Because right here it says in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 9, and being made perfect, referring to Yahusha, he became the author of eternal salvation to all of them that went to church every Sunday, kept Easter, kept Christmas. No, that obey him. So we got to take this verse in context. Paul is actually promoting keeping the commandments because he's saying that Yahushua gives salvation to those that obey him. The gift of salvation is given to those that actually are obedient children. So that's just something to think about. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 15 to 16, which says, wherefore the set-apart Spirit also is a witness to us, for after that he had said before, this is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, says Yahuwah. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. So this is a precursor to Paul getting into the new covenant, which we'll get into actually right now, actually. So this is going to be a short little part here about Paul referencing the new covenant, and that the new covenant would be Yahuwah's own Spirit causing us to keep his laws. So we're going to go into there real quick and actually shift gears. And we're going to go there and go to Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 36. And this says, behold, the days come, says Yahuwah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Yashrael and with the house of Yahudah. Not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand and bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband unto them, says Yahuwah. But this shall be the covenant I will make with the house of Yashrael after those days, says Yahuwah. I will put my law in their inward parts, and will write it in their hearts. In their hearts. I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, every man his brother, saying, know Yahuwah, for they shall all know me. From the least of them unto the greatest of them, says Yahuwah, I will forgive their lawlessness, and I will remember their transgression no more. So verse 34 is actually saying that this is future. This is going to happen. We are in the process of Yahuwah putting his commandments in our hearts, but he hasn't literally put it in us that we should know him without having others to teach one another. So this is not fully fulfilled yet. It's partially fulfilled because he's putting his commandments in our inward parts right now, but this is not fully fulfilled. Verse 35 says, thus says Yahuwah, which gives the sun for a light by day, and the ordinance of the moon and the stars for a light by night, which divides the sea when the waves thereof roar. Yahuwah of armies is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, says Yahuwah, then the seed of Yashrael shall also cease from being a nation before me forever. Basically, the last verse here is saying that if there's no more sun and no more moon for the lights, the greater and lesser lights, if there's no more covenant with them, then he would have no covenant with us, his people, Yashrael. So this is actually saying if he breaks the covenant with the sun and the moon, being the lights, he would break the covenant he has with us, basically meaning that this covenant will never be broken. Just to put it in layman's terms, never going to be broken. So, and then if we go to Hebrews chapter 8, verse 8 to 10, this continues, and this Hebrews 8 to 10 is actually Paul cross-referencing from the Old Testament, Jeremiah 31, and also in Ezekiel 36. So Hebrews 8 verse 8 says, for finding fault with them, not with the law, with them. He says, behold, the days come, says Yahuwah, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Yashrael and with the house of Yahudah, Now, according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, says Yahuwah. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Yashrael after those days, says Yahuwah. I will put my laws into their mind and write them on their hearts, and I will be to them a Elohim, and they shall be to me a people. So that's Hebrews 8:8-10. And it's worded a little different because just stating that our Old Testament in our modern Bibles is not the actual Old Testament that the apostles and Yahusha used. So if you want to find the actual Old Testament they would have been using, it's called the Septuagint. You can get it for free on Bible apps. But anyway, I didn't want to go too much on a rabbit trail. But if you look up Jeremiah 31:31 in the Septuagint, it reads word for word the same of what Paul's quoting from here. So, all right, so now we're going to go to Ezekiel 36:26-27. And let's see here. Verses 26 of 27 of Ezekiel chapter 36. And this says, a new heart also I will give you, a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes. You shall keep my judgments and do them. So we're getting a precept of Yahuwah's spirit causes us to keep his commandments. Now, can we find a second witness of that in the New Testament? I believe we can. If you will turn with me to Acts chapter 5, verse 32, this shows that Paul is actually agreeing with the Old Testament here. He says, and we are his witnesses of these things, Acts chapter 5, verse 32. And so is also the set-apart spirit, whom Yahuwah has given to them that obey him. Okay, so the set-apart spirit is almost a prerequisite to have it, is you have to be obeying the Father. He doesn't just give it willy-nilly to everyone. Okay, so that's just something to think about. Also, we have, let's see here. Let's see if I forgot anything yet. So now we're going to go on to Galatians chapter 5, verses 16-17. This I say then, walk in the Spirit. So this portion is going to be walking in the Spirit versus walking in the flesh. What is the difference? And what is walking in the Spirit proposed to walking in the flesh? Okay. So far we've already established earlier in Romans 8:7, this basically the law is spiritual, I am carnal, sold under sin. So we would have to say the law is spiritual, sin is fleshy. So with that precept, we're going to read Galatians 5:16-17. This I say then, walk in the Spirit. So what's walking in the Spirit? And you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So if you are carnal, sold under sin, you are walking in the flesh. If you submit to the lust of your flesh, you are walking in sin. If you walk in the Spirit, you are walking in the law of Yahuwah. You are obeying the law of Yahuwah. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to one another. So they cannot do the things that you would. So again, verses 16 and 17 are saying that the Spirit lusts against the flesh. You can't have both at the same time. You can't be walking in the Spirit or walking at the flesh at the same time, because they're contrary to one another. Okay, so now with that concept, we're going to go to Colossians chapter 2, and start at verse 8 to get a context of this chapter. It says, but beware lest any man spoil you through the philosophy and vain deceit, and after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after the Messiah. So right here, Paul's warning them. don't be led astray by vain philosophy, vain, ideas of man that's not according to Messiah. So as we go down here to verse 14, it says, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the stake. Now we're going to stop right here. Now, would it make any sense that Paul in verse 8 is talking about doctrines and commandments of men, the things of the world, and actually if I go to the Scriptures 2009, there's cross-references to this verse to Colossians 2:20 and Ephesians 2:15. Now, Ephesians 2:15 says, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the Torah of the commands and dogmas, so as to create himself one new man from the two, thus making peace. Now we got to understand, what is the dogmas? Now these obviously are referring to the enmity and possibly referring to our rebellion, even the curses that were against us. Because Colossians 2:20 says, if then you died with Messiah from the elementary matters of this world, sin, why as through living in the world do you subject yourselves to dogmas, thoughts of man, sin, the wicked ways of mankind? So we have to understand what is the dogmas that's really been talked about in Colossians 2:14. And then we go on to the next verse. Having stripped the principalities and authorities, he made public display of them, having prevailed over them in it. And then it goes on to say, let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking or in respect of a festival or a new moon or Sabbath, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of Messiah. So basically, in these three verses, he's basically saying, don't let anyone judge you in keeping these things, in eating, in festival or new moons or Sabbaths. Don't let anyone judge you, basically referring to people that are not part of the body, because the last verse says, but the body of Messiah. So the only one that can judge us is the ones that are within the body of Messiah. Don't let outsiders judge you of keeping these things. So we got to understand the true context of what Paul's actually saying here. And then it starts then it goes into more detail if you read on later in Colossians 2 about the Gnostics creeping into the Colossian assembly and actually teaching them that it's sinful to eat meat. Don't eat meat. And that's why Paul was referenced to talk about, if someone is convicted to only eat vegetables, let him only eat vegetables. If someone wants to eat meat, let him eat meat. So basically, Paul in his day was also dealing with Gnostics creeping into the body of Messiah, false believers that were in Gnosticism. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit. Now, after those verses, let's go to, I believe I haven't read this yet, Romans chapter 7:12, which says, and right here, Paul is basically saying, right here, now you got to ask yourselves, is Paul saying the law of Yahuwah is good or is it bad? Because in Romans 7:12, it says, so that the law truly is set apart and the command set apart and righteous and good. Again, so if we read earlier that Romans 3:31, we are to uphold the law, then obviously Paul is for the law. So again, now we're going to the last part here. This is part 4 in this study, and it's called, you cannot. Does Paul teach that we can have belief without works, or does he teach that we are to have belief with works and you can't have one without the other? Okay, so this is the last part of, is Paul schizophrenic or contradicting himself? Is he saying one thing that you can have belief alone, you don't need works, and then saying you need belief with works. So now we're going to get into the last part here. So we're going to first go to Romans chapter 4 here. And we're going to start at verse 1. What then shall we say? Abraham our father to have found according to the flesh? For if Abraham was declared right by works, he was ground for boasting, but not before Yahuwah. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed Yahuwah, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness. And to him who is working, the reward is not reckoned as a favor, but as a debt. And to him who is not working, but believes on him who is declaring the right, the wicked, his belief is reckoned for righteousness. Even as Daud also says of the barakness of the man to whom Yahuwah reckons righteousness without works. Blessed, barak are those whose lawlessnesses are forgiven, and whose transgressions are covered. Barak is the man to whom Yahuwah shall by no means reckon transgression. Is this baraking then upon the circumcision only, or also upon the uncircumcised? For we affirm belief was reckoned unto Abraham for righteousness. How then was it reckoned, being in circumcision or uncircumcision? Not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the belief, while in uncircumcision for him to be a righteousness to be reckoned to them also. Basically, what Paul is trying to say here from verse 1 to 11 is belief came for first, then works. He was reckoned to righteousness. Yahuwah reckoned to him righteousness because he trusted in Yahuwah, and that trust followed with works. So now we're also going to go to a couple of cross-references I have here. The book of James, but actually his true name is Jacob, chapter 2, verse 17 to 18. So also belief, if it does not have works, is in itself dead. But someone might say, you have belief and I have works. Show me your belief without your works, and I'll show you my belief by my works. Now, Yahusha's half-brother Jacob is simply just saying, belief without works is dead because there's no proof of it. You are just claiming to believe. And then he goes on to say in the next verse, you believe that Yahuwah is one, you do well. The demons also believe and shudder. Basically meaning that educational belief that Yahushua is the Messiah is really not anything. The demons believe that he's the son of Yahuwah. You'll see that in the Basora records, but that's another topic for another time. But the demons even called him the son of Yahuwah. So, I mean, that's simply not enough, just believing that he's the Messiah. So now if we go to Revelations 12:17, and the dragon, so this is Revelations chapter 12, verse 17, and the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to fight with the remnant of her seed, those guarding the commands of Yahuwah and possessing the witness of Yahushua Messiah. Okay, so again, the dragon attacks those that have the testimony of Yahushua, the belief in Yahushua, and keeping the commandments. It's not one or the other, it's the people that actually do both. So again, the dragon is only worried about those that believe in Yahushua but also keep the commandments. So that's something to also think about. And then as we go from there, we go to Revelations 22, verse 14, which says, Barak are those doing his commandments, so that the authorities shall be theirs unto the tree of life, and enter through the gates into the city. So Revelations 22:14 is actually saying that those that do the commandments will be entering into the New Jerusalem. So the New Jerusalem won't have any tolerance for lawlessness. There will be no tolerance for lawlessness in the kingdom. So quite frankly, that's what Revelation 22:14 is literally saying. That they are given to the tree of life who do the commandments, who guard the commandments. So now we're going to go to the last one here, which is Revelations 14:12, which says, "Here is the endurance of the set apart ones. Here are those guarding the commandments of Yahuwah and the belief of Yahusha." So again, it's saying the same exact thing. Here is the endurance of the set apart ones. So the special group that most likely will be counted worthy to be taken into the wilderness and be protected in the hour of trial when the great tribulation happens is those keeping the commandments of Yahuwah and belief in Yahusha. So I believe that wraps things up. We pretty much covered everything that I can think of. So if my sister Shoshana or brother Bobby, sister Kristen, or sister Sally might have anything to add.
There was one scripture that had to do with if you willfully sin, you will no longer have the...
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I totally did not cite Hebrews 10:26-27. My bad about that.
You no longer have the covering of Yahushua's blood if you willfully sin.
Yeah, it says, "For if we sin willfully," meaning on purpose, "after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, therefore remains no more sacrifice for transgressions, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries." And just for an interesting fact, adversaries is another word for Hashatan. Actually means in English the enemy, the adversary. So meaning that those that are perishing in the lake of fire are those that willfully sinned. That's what it's saying in verse 27. Saying that, "But a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries," the enemies. So the enemies of Yahuwah willfully sin. They sin on purpose without caring. So that's what connects to people that willfully sin. Even if you're a believer and willfully sin, there's a very good possibility you're going to be in the lake of fire. So after that, I think that's it. I think that's a good climax there, a good last cross-reference to give.
True.
Yeah, I'm pretty wrapped up too.
Doubt that we have to keep these commands. And Yahusha even says, if you love me, keep my commandments. How simple. And Bobby, you were going to say something?
No, that pretty much wraps it up. You know, there's not much more to say. Shaul, Paul, he was a Pharisee. A lot of the times his words get mistaken, and they think the law is the Torah, which is not. It's the Talmud. He was a Pharisee. He explains that. What more? How much more do you have to say? You know what I'm saying? People can't distinguish the law of sin and death, the law, the Torah, you know? I don't know. I think we made a strong point today for at least people to look into this.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting too that Yahusha in Matthew 7:23-24 actually says, "Get away from me, you workers of lawlessness." And that same word is actually used for 2 Peter 3:16-17. That same Greek word that means anomia, basically without Torah, without the law. So,
And in 2 Thessalonians 2, it talks about the man of lawlessness to be revealed. He is the son of destruction. And I believe is that not the same word?
yeah, that's anomia is in 2 Thessalonians, yeah. Every time you see lawlessness or lawless, it's usually the same Greek word. Like the Greek language is pretty simplified, proposed to Hebrew. they have very few similar words. It's pretty much the same word where you see you workers of lawlessness, anything that has the word lawless or lawlessness is usually the same Greek word anomia. And so it's pretty much what Paul was referencing is what Yahusha referenced. I mean, there's no difference there. They're saying the same exact thing. And and the one I just cited, Hebrews 10, he's using the word sin. I mean, anyone who's listening right now, if you want to know what sin actually is, not what your preacher tells you, but what sin is according to Scripture, 1 John 3:4. Sin is, or I like to paraphrase in modern terminology, sin equals the transgression of the law. If you are transgressing the law in any way, then you've sinned, and we've all fallen short of keeping the whole law. So that's just reality. But what Paul is talking about in context, the one we gave from Hebrews 10, is willfully, on purpose, not caring. Oh, I know this is against the Creator's laws, but I don't care. That type of
way. 1 John 3 verse 4 actually says, everyone doing sin also does lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. So we have to keep the law to avoid sinning. That is proof.
Oh, and another one came to mind that's pretty powerful from that same book of 1 John. Chapter 2, verse 4 says, he who says he is in him but does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So I wanted to end with that also. That if we say we are in Yahusha, that we died in Yahusha, as Paul just quoted from, all the verses we just quoted from, Paul actually says to die to Messiah and put away the ways of this world, the elementary matters of this world. If we are to do that, even as Paul said, we need to keep his commandments, or else John says we are a liar. The Apostle John says we are a liar if we don't keep his commandments and say we are in him, that we're followers of his.
Sin is lawlessness. We just saw that.
So I don't know if our sister Sally wanted to add anything or any comments.
I am just enjoying listening to this program, this sermon this afternoon in the study.
Yeah. All right. Well, from all of us at the Awakened by Yahuwah Assembly Fellowship Group, we just want to thank you guys for joining us, and hopefully this raised some curiosity and you guys seek the Scriptures. And whoever has not accepted Yahusha, I'm going to keep saying this in every study we do, we all hope that you accept Yahusha as your personal Savior today, and that you would accept the good news that He died and rose again to cover your sins, that you would have a fresh new start, and that you would be reconciled to the Father, Yahuwah, and that you would be part of His children, part of His people, Israel. And, so I just pray and hope that you would accept what it says in John 3:16, and that you would believe in Him, and you would start allowing Him to renew you and cause you to be a new creation, as 2 Corinthians 5:17 says. So I just pray that, and I hope whoever's listening that a seed was sown, and thank you for joining us.
And we welcome any of you, new believers that want to come worship with us. You are very welcome.
Yep, you can find us on Facebook. We are the Awakened by Yahuwah group. You can personally message any one of us. My sister Shoshana is on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. Most of our groups on Facebook. You can even message me on here on YouTube if you want to reach out to me. You want to fellowship with us. You can email me. So just if you guys want fellowship, just reach out to us, and we'll be glad to have you guys. on and join with us every Sabbath. So, shalom.
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 Shalom.